Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here in the Philippines, a beautiful country that I should have visited a long time ago. But it's my first time in Manila, and I am very grateful for the hospitality that you are giving me. And I want to thank in particular Ms. Belmonte Almurum, Mayor of the city, Mr. Perez and Mr. Divina Gracia for your hospitality and for organizing the event. They are, of course, the ranking officials of Anti-Red Tape Authority. And I also want to thank my colleagues of the World Bank, presented here today by quite a few colleagues. And Dan Chen, I appreciate your work. All right, so let's see if we can present the PowerPoint. Okay, so today I'm going to discuss the Business Ready 2024 report. No country has been able to develop without sustained economic growth. And with growth come transformation and opportunities. Opportunities for jobs and opportunities for investment. In fact, according to the World Development Report 2024, which is called the Middle Income Trap, countries that are in the middle income category, such as the Philippines, need about 5% of GDP per capita growth in order to escape what is called the middle income trap. That is, in order to make that step to transition towards an advanced economy. Just remember that number, 5% per capita GDP growth, which more or less is between 7 and 8 just GDP growth. The Philippines has achieved around, in the last decade, 3.4% of per capita GDP growth. So this shows a gap, actually, between what the country should be growing at and what has grown in the last 10 years. And I must tell you, and I will come back to this at the end of this presentation, that even this 3.4 is actually high with respect to the historical standards of the Philippines. The historical standards are actually lower. This is a big challenge for most economies that are in the middle income category. And the key to escape this middle income trap and to actually accelerate growth is the private sector. When you have a private sector that is dynamic and vibrant and innovative, then you have growth. But to be sure, the private sector is really an economic giant. It provides already 90% of jobs, 70% of output, 75% of investment, and 80% of government revenue. So it's already a giant. But sometimes this private sector behaves like a sleeping giant. So how can we make this large sector of the economy become awake and vibrant? We can do it only if the business environment is favorable. So how can we do this? By lowering the barriers that are enacted that prevent this growth of the private sector, but also by putting in place the enablers, the public services that are necessary for the private sector to become this engine of growth of the economy. At the end of this process, The goal is to have an economy that is sophisticated, that is diverse, that is vibrant, that is constantly in a state of change and renewal. The big question, therefore, is how do we enable this business environment? How do we achieve that business environment that is favorable for private sector growth? And this is what we try to answer through this report. So, Business Ready is the new World Bank corporate flagship, and it replaces Doing Business. Doing Business had its run. It was created about 20 years ago, and it was a very impactful and to some respects very successful project of the World Bank. Now the World Bank decided to create a new project that will be even stronger, and that's what I am presenting here to you today. Business Ready has this short name, Be Ready, which of course, as you can tell, is a call for action. Because this is exactly what is needed, a call for action from the private sector and also from the government. And I will try to explain in exactly what ways. So Business Ready is now in its initial phase, and we are rolling out the project gradually in different countries. So the first report that was published in October 2024 includes the Philippines and about 50 economies. This year we are preparing a report that will cover over 100 economies that will be released in September of 2025. And next year we will have about 180 economies that will cover most of the world. So that's what we will declare this rollout process completed. And from that point onwards, we will have worldwide coverage through this report. So let me explain to you what this report is about, what it contains. So, first of all, it has 10 topics. And these 10 topics cover the life cycle of the firm. From the moment the firm starts to the moment that the firm decides to either close or reorganize itself. So let me go over each of these topics. The first, of course, is business entry, the ease of starting a domestic or a foreign enterprise. The business entry, the firm needs to find a place where it can have its operations. Therefore, we need efficiency in the procedures to rent, to transfer a property, or maybe build a property. Utility services, which really means reliable electricity, water, and internet. Labor, which has two components. One is the flexibility that firms may have in hiring and firing workers depending on their needs, and also a fair treatment of employees. Financial services, which is the effective access to banking, credit, and electronic payments. International trade, of course, very important for an open economy, such as the Philippines, the ease of using customs and trade infrastructure for the international exchange of goods and services. Taxation that relies on the efficiency of the tax administration and the tax system, but also looks at how moderate the tax burden is. The ability to resolve commercial disputes is the next topic, both in court but also through other means, such as arbitration and mediation. Market competition, which includes not only fair competition, but also procurement, that is competing to obtain a contract with the government, and also innovation. And finally, business insolvency, which is about the ease of liquidating or reorganizing a company. So as you can see, there is a life cycle here. And this is on purpose, because what we want to emphasize is the dynamic nature of businesses. Businesses are like living entities that have a start, possibly have an end, and they must be in constant renewal in order to be a force for economic growth. Now, for each of these 10 topics, we have 3 pillars. They should be seen as complementary. Okay? So we have the first pillar is the regulatory framework, which explains the regulations and the rules that a firm must follow as they go through their life cycle. Public services are all the facilities that the government can provide in order to facilitate firms' compliance with the regulatory framework, but also to enable the activities that firms have. And operational efficiency measures the ease of compliance with the regulatory framework and the effectiveness of the public services for firms directly. So this may sound a bit abstract, so let me give you some examples taken from 2 of the topics that I explained before. The first has to do with a set of examples, has to do with business location. You might remember this is the second topic in the life cycle of a firm. So in the regulatory framework, one example is that we measure the restrictions on the ability of foreign companies to lease or own property. We examine that. This is only an example. We go to public services, we look at whether there are digital platforms to register a property transfer. And once we go to efficiency, or to measure efficiency, we go to the factor, that is the time to obtain a construction permit. So that's the way we think about the connection between these 3 pillars. The second example has to do with dispute resolution. So under the first pillar, we will have the existence of a code of ethics for judges. Does it exist? Is it part of the law? We have, under public services, the existence of digital platforms to hold virtual court hearings. And under operational efficiency, we have the time and the cost for a firm to resolve a commercial dispute. These are just examples. I will try to present as many examples as I can. So we have in this project 2 data sources. This is an important difference with respect to doing business. Under doing business, we only had 1 data source, and these were experts who provided information to the team. Now we have experts, yes, they provide information through expert questionnaires, and we have a total of 21 questionnaires. And about 60 to 80 people that respond to these questionnaires. And we have as a second source, enterprise surveys. These are representative surveys of formal firms that gives us information about what firms think about the business environment, and also what firms think about the difficulties that they have to confront in their daily operations. The expert questionnaires therefore provide data from experts, whereas enterprise surveys provide data from firms. The expert questionnaires are mostly used for pillars 1 and 2, the regulatory framework and the public services. Sometimes they also provide information on pillar 3, on efficiency. Enterprise surveys measures the factor. So it's about what actually happens in reality. And this information goes for pillar 3, for the operational efficiency. Expert questionnaires will be refreshed. This data will be refreshed every year. So, for instance, although we conducted these expert assessments for the Philippines for 2024, we are currently conducting the same kind of assessment for 2025. So we will have new data when we present this report in 2025, in September. Enterprise surveys is a much more expensive project. And so the way that we have designed it is that we collect directly data from firms in a 3-year cycle. So every 3 years, we'll come to your country and we will conduct this representative survey of formal firms. And the results that I will show you, they actually are related to the survey that we conducted over 2023 and part of 2024. Okay, so now let me tell you some of the results. First, I will tell you about the global results, and then I will go deeper into the results related to the Philippines. So the first thing for me to emphasize is how rich the data set is. It contains 1,200 indicators for each economy. It is, if you will, sort of a compass and guide for reform. It gives you a lot of detail into what international best practices are. And therefore, for a institution like yours that trying to get the best possible business environment, then you actually have a clear map of what to do. And also in the assessment, you can see the areas where you are not performing well. And they might call for your own reflection. See how we can do this better. Now this doesn't, even though it's very extensive, we cannot claim that we are comprehensive. We cannot claim that we have covered everything that is relevant to the country. But we give you a guide and sort of a compass. And then you will have to develop, looking at your own economy, whatever else is necessary for this development of the private sector. Now, it will be very hard for me to present 1,200 indicators in the minutes that I have allowed. So the same thing happens with the report. We have to summarize these indicators into scores. And we have devised a way to present scores by pillars. Remember, we have 3 pillars: regulatory framework, public services, operational efficiency, and we have 10 topics that cover the life cycle of the firm. Well, for each of them, we have a score. Now, this score goes from 0 to 100, where of course 100 is better, and it means the percentage of business readiness in a particular pillar or topic. That's the way to interpret the number. So it's only natural to ask, well, what countries perform well in business ready, right? In at least the 50 economies that we were able to measure in the report that was presented in 2024. Now, we find that wealthier countries tend to perform better, business ready. That's not very surprising. And there are two countries that stand out. Estonia is a country that has implemented digital practices. It's the leader in the world in terms of having digital services for firms and also for people. Singapore is a country in the region, an example for all countries in ASEAN, and I would say even in East Asia, because it is very efficient and it is very pragmatic in the approach that it has to the business environment. Now, what is a bit more surprising, or at least was surprising to us when we assess the result, is that countries do not need to be rich to develop a favorable business environment. So this is not something that is just available or reachable by economies that are advanced or rich. And let me give you a few examples. Rwanda, a country, of course, in sub-Saharan Africa, performs well in the top 20% of 6 out of 10 topics. And maybe not surprisingly, because of that, it has been able to double the size of its economy in 10 years. It has also doubled the size of foreign direct investment over 10 years. The second country I want to highlight is Georgia. Georgia performs in the top 20% in 7 out of 10 topics. And it is, compared to other richer countries in the region, a lot more efficient. There are other countries that actually have this mixed performance. So for instance, Colombia, a country obviously in South America, is one that performs quite well in pillars 1 and 2, that is regulatory framework and public services. But it doesn't perform well in operational efficiency. The last example here is Vietnam. Vietnam actually performs not so well in pillars 1 and 2, yet they perform well in operational efficiency. So somehow they have been able to overcome the barriers that they had and develop a system that actually makes them very efficient. What we have noticed is that in many countries there is this public services gap, which we can also say it's a kind of implementation gap. So that means the difference between the regulatory framework score and the public service score. It happens that for regulations, the scores are higher than for public services. Okay, so public services are lagging behind these laws and regulations. Now, this is something that we found in the data. Maybe we should not have been surprised, because it's a lot easier to enact a law, to pass a regulation, than actually to implement it and make it effective. So we do see this gap, and the gap tends to be higher for low-income economies. In fact, for low-income economies, the gap is 3 times as high as for high-income economies. Now let's go to the Philippines, and this is maybe where the presentation will become more interesting. And I want to present these results in the context of the international economy that we have measured. I told you there are 50 economies, right? But they were not just selected so that they will represent a few particular regions. They were selected so that they are representative at different levels of income and also different regions around the world. So let's see. This is what we have in terms of the pillar scores for the Philippines. I hope that you can see as well. But what we can see is that for the regulatory framework, the scores are higher for the Philippines than for public services or for operational efficiency. So this difference is what we call the public services gap. This is Singapore. In Singapore, the gap basically does not exist. Performs better, higher scores than the Philippines, and in terms of operational efficiency, the difference is quite remarkable. In green, we have the best in the world for each of the pillars. So the best in the world is better than the Philippines and Singapore for the regulatory framework and for public services. The best in the world for operational efficiency is actually Singapore. So that's why then you can see them as equal. We can do the same for the topics, for topic scores. And here we have 10 topic scores. I could not really show you 10 bars, so I'm using this as a spider web chart to show you the situation of the Philippines. Now, I would just highlight that if this graph is bigger, then you're closer to the frontier, which is the perfect score. So So the smaller the graph, that means that you're not doing so well. And it also shows the discrepancies that you can see across the topics. Oh, and I will then just underscore that in the case of the Philippines, we have, in the case of market competition, business insolvency, and business entry, lower scores. So there must be something there that is not working quite so well. If we do this for Singapore, you can see that the graph is bigger, meaning that they are a better score for each of the topics, and the best in Be Ready, of course, will have an even bigger. But even the best in Be Ready cannot reach the frontier. We can do this in a different way as well, and we can just rank the countries for each of the three pillars. And in the case of the Philippines, this is what you see. So that's the median, 25 is the median economy. And for the regulatory framework, Philippines does a little better than the median. For public services, almost at the median, but for operational efficiency, well below. So again, something happening there for public services and for operational efficiency. This is Singapore, which does, as I told you before, quite well in public service and operational efficiency. We can do the same for the topics, and this is what Philippines does. Again, I want to underscore that not very well in terms of business entry, not very well in terms of business insolvency and market competition. And we could add that not very well either in relative on business location and financial services. If we look at the international comparison with respect to East Asian countries, you can see the difference there. I have highlighted the best performer for each of the 10 topics in East Asia. The Philippines actually performs the best in this collection of countries in one topic, and that topic is labor. It's maybe the consolation. So let me tell you, because all of this is about scores, and you may be really willing to get some sense into some of the indicators, right? Beyond the scores. The scores are interesting in a summary, but let's reflect on some of the indicators. And I will just give you one indicator per topic. So I'll tell you about 10 indicators, but remember, there are 1,200 indicators in the whole thing. So for business entry, in the Philippines, it takes 70 days to register a new domestic company. It's a long time. In the most efficient economies that we have measured, and the business ready, it takes 3 days. Huge difference. So this is why business entry was not really doing well. Business location, also an area of some concern. In the Philippines, it takes companies 90 days to transfer a property. 90 days. In the most efficient economies, it takes 1 day. Utility services, in the Philippines, it appears that internet disruptions are quite common. So 50% of firms say that they experience at least one internet disruption in a typical month. In the most efficient economies, this is only 2%. For labor, although I told you that the Philippines performs well, still there are some areas where we see gaps. For instance, it takes for companies about 8 weeks to dismiss a full-time worker for economic reasons. In the most efficient economies, it's only 1 week. Financial services, in the Philippines, only 70% of payments by firms to their suppliers are made electronically. In the most efficient economies, it's over 99%. On international trade, we also see some gaps. It takes about 15 days for imported goods and 4 days for exported goods to clear all border controls. In the most efficient economy, it takes less than 1 day for both. Let me look at taxation. In the Philippines, 56% of firms needing a VAT refund did not even bother to apply for the process for a refund because they think that the process is too long or too complicated. In the most efficient economies, it's less than 1%. Dispute resolution. In the Philippines, it takes 4 years to resolve a commercial dispute. Now, this is about 5 times what it takes in the best practice economies, where the average is about 9 months. Market competition, what we see as the main problem here is price regulation. 22% of firms report that the prices are regulated. This is not conducive to strong market competition. In the best economies in this category, only 4% of these prices are regulated. And finally, in the category of business insolvency, in the Philippines, the time to resolve liquidation proceedings is 5 years. 5 years. In the most efficient economy, it takes only 7 months. So this delay is just a reflection of what I told you before, that in business entry and business insolvency is where we see the largest gaps. What's the main message then for the Philippines? The main message is that because of the great need that the country has for economic growth and for job creation, the Philippines really needs to improve to become business ready. The main issue that it needs to improve on is the effectiveness of public services. The second is the efficiency with which these public services are deployed to provide better compliance of regulations. The regulatory framework is also lagging behind, but in relative terms, public services may be the weakest point that we find. Let me go back now to the issue that we started this conversation about. This is growth in ASEAN countries. And the Philippines is represented through this green color. What you can see is that in the 1990s, the Philippines was close to Indonesia in terms of GDP per capita. Now, because of poor growth over these 30 plus years, the Philippines is lagging behind. The country that has grown the most over this long term, we could say, is Vietnam. Vietnam, that was the poorest in 1990, is now sort of fighting for the best position with Indonesia. These are numbers that actually come from Latin America. These are numbers that we in Latin America would be envious about. So we actually would like to have something like this. All the economies growing with some hiccups, but growing. Yet, when we compare these ASEAN economies with Singapore, I told you Singapore is the leader in this region in terms of business environment. And what we see is that there is lack of convergence with respect to Singapore. And in fact, for the Philippines, there has been a process of going backwards. In the 1990s, it was 10% of income per capita with respect to Singapore. Now, it's in the order of 8%. The only country that actually has achieved some progress with respect to Singapore is Vietnam, that was below 6 and now is over 10. And hopefully will keep improving that way. The hope, of course, is that not only one economy has this vibrancy to catch up with the best. The hope is that every economy, including the Philippines, is able to catch up with the best. And the only way to do this is by having a strong enough private sector that can lead to high sustainable growth. So many countries may feel that they are stuck in the middle income trap. The business environment is improving the business environment is really the way to escape the middle income trap. The key messages that I want to leave you with are the following. The first is that it is vital that in the Philippines, the ambition for economic growth is resumed, is confirmed, is maintained. The second is that the private sector can actually be a key component in this strategy. It can be the engine of high and sustained growth. That does not imply, however, that the government has to keep a hands-off approach. Just the opposite. The government can do a lot to actually improve the business environment of the country, creating a favorable business environment for investment, for innovation, and for competition. If you will, the government is the one in charge of providing the climate, the environment, and then firms on their own are able to do the growth that is necessary. Then the best thing that we can advise governments to do, this in general terms, is to improve the quality of regulations, to provide well-designed public services, and to ensure that they are put in practice and not just left on paper. We believe that data and indicators, like the ones produced by Business Ready, can actually serve that role of opening eyes so that you will learn through facts and not through facts. So this is Be Ready, and thank you very much for your attention.